Okay, friends, could we come back together again, please? So we're going to have a bit of an open mic session now. It's great to hear lots of conversation in the room, lots of energy. We're just going to have an open mic session again. I mean, just a few, 3 or 4, 4 or 5. Is there an open mic? Sorry, on the tables. Yes, just use the tables. So again, short, so 20 seconds. And let's try and hear from some of the voices we might not have heard of. But please, please go ahead.
The word partnership has been quoted, throughout the 2 days. But we need to think about the notion of partnership. When you think about what a faith organization brings into a partnership, it has reach, it has community action through volunteers, it has an infrastructure to deliver. All of those have a value. And for the donor agency, those in a way are free goods.
Yes.
But one of the challenges we have is to actually put a value on those assets. And then for the faith-based organization to say we are coming in as co-investors because we are bringing in resources to the table. Right. And rather than be a recipient of a grant or whatever, we are investing with you towards a common goal. That's fantastic.
I love that. So genuine partners as opposed to and trying to subvert the power relationship. I think that's fantastic. Okay, thank you. Other reflections, please. There was a lot of conversation going on. Okay, on the table over there. And then we'll come down to the table, group 4 down here.
I'm doing this with my back to it. I can't do it. While we were talking about the multiplicity of truly important and life-changing issues, what also emerged in this is that these 2 days have been really a remembering of what it is we fundamentally know. And this rehearsal of history, and it was particularly well emphasized in the Ebola presentation, that it was those early HIV stories which actually gave us the fodder, the experience, the understanding of how to face the next 2 crises.
Yes.
And that it is easy for us in the midst of deliverables and documentation to forget that the history and the story of that is what has kept us all alive doing that work over and over again. That's where we spend our time.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great reflection. Okay, table 4 down here.
Yes. In our group, where we are discussing or seeing the lack of participation of some regions like Latin America, we are only 3 people participating in this meeting that I understood that was a global meeting. And that's what we have to reflect. And also that is very focused in Africa's or Anglo-African issues.
Yes, so the real challenge there, there's a great focus here on Anglo-speaking Africa, but how do we broaden it? And how do we make sure we're getting the voice from other parts of the world where, of course, faith is as prevalent as anywhere else? Thank you. Okay, more comments, please. You can volunteer people on your table if they're being reticent. Or modest. Atala.
There were many issues that came out, but I'll just take one. People were struck by how they individually had been grappling with the same issues, and that the opportunity to share them and hear others' perspectives, how they addressed them, was extremely useful. Some people felt that they would share that further down the line within their networks. And there was also an issue about the need for mapping going forward and the lack of current mapping of faith-based actors.
Okay, so a lot of that really is about how do we just create a collective consciousness about what we know, and how do we create more opportunities to really connect and relate and collaborate. Thank you. Let's have a few more. Yeah, please.
For myself, there was a frustration. And it was a frustration that there was a recognition of the tremendous contribution of the faith-based organizations in terms of their reach and their networks and their contributions, blah, 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 blah. And that the secular agencies want all that service, but not the faith component. And that's what makes us different.
Yes. So maybe that's one of the big challenges and opportunities going forward. We talked about very much the same issue on our table. How do we begin to create an appreciation of that? And maybe we need some new and creative approaches to raise awareness around that. But hopefully that'll be something we'll be able to talk about in just a moment. Yes? Yeah. Yes, please. Peter.
Peter Prove, World Council of Churches. I was just incredibly struck by how, having spent much of the previous part of this consultation, this meeting, lamenting the lack of evidence, we were suddenly confronted in the last session with the proliferation of evidence demonstrating what we have assumed but maybe not been very confident about in our relations with partners, that there is plenty of evidence to substantiate both the impact and the cost effectiveness of working through grassroots faith-based networks as in the implementation of development. And I think, if anything, it shows that perhaps the methodology or even the focus on gathering that evidence and presenting it in a strategic way is what is lacking. Yes. And could be shared more broadly.
Yeah. So I think that's, and I think personally that was probably one of my greatest insights as well that I've taken away, is exactly this. And we're going to be able to, this is going to be one of the key themes we're about to pick up, is evidence and thinking differently about our evidence, Peter. So do get involved in that discussion shortly. Okay, we've got time for one more. Let's have one more, please. Thank you. Table over on the, can't see which number, go for it.
I've been volunteered.
Well done. Well volunteered.
It does relate back to an earlier comment, I believe, that Becky made around procurement. We felt very affirmed, I believe, by the bilateral, multilateral discussion of commitment. This table felt that was a fairly significant breakthrough. That commitment, of course, needs to be articulated in ways that actually are actionable.
Yes.
We felt one of those ways could be that when programs are designed from the bilateral, multilateral perspective, that there is a requirement that faith actors are consulted in a large manner. Secondly, if those faith actors are found that they could actually add value, or a value proposition exists with those faith actors, that the mechanisms, the procurement mechanisms they actually develop would actually encourage the inclusion of those faith actors within the type of program that was designed. So it should actually be articulated in a very concrete way that those faith actors are consulted, and then if they are actually providing value, they would actually become part of a procurement, if you would like, bias or a preferential option for the faith-based groups.
Yes, very good. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Great. Well, we will capture that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that's just a great way of just getting a sense of the individual collective energy in the room. So I'm now going to hand over to Adam, who's going to introduce the synthesis, which is going to set the context for our action planning. And I'm hoping Adam is somewhere for me to hand over to him. Adam? Is Adam not here? Adam is here. Sorry, Adam. I'm afraid Adam didn't believe I'd actually finish on time, so Adam, over to you.
All right, so we have some extremely important work to finish off with in this afternoon. Hope everyone's gotten some extra caffeine if you're in need of it. Certainly get some. We know that we've had a particularly rich and robust agenda so far, and it's been a whirlwind of incredible knowledge sharing, information sharing. A whole slew of recommendations have been coming forward, and we have captured those. But we realize that in this setting and in the context of the time we have left, we can't dig into every specific technical recommendation that's been put forward. Luckily, our friends at McKinsey and others have been working to capture those, and those are going to be shared with all of you so that we will certainly try to find ways to continue to build on some of those very specific recommendations that came from each of the cross-cutting area sessions as well as the thematic sessions on building and strengthening health systems, disaster and humanitarian assistance, and combating gender and sexual violence-based violence. What we want to do in this session is to kind of stay a little bit more, maybe not all the way up at 30,000 feet, but somewhere around 10,000 feet, so that we can kind of grapple with some core themes that we think are critical for moving forward many of the specific recommendations that have come forward. If you think about how we started this conference with the McKinsey report, in that report there were kind of 4 questions that framed this conference, and it's actually encouraging to me that those questions were quite relevant, quite salient for what we've been discussing. I think that they really were on the mark in terms of capturing some of the real, tensions in some cases, real challenges and real opportunities that are in front of us. So just to remind us a little bit, the first is the importance of framing the case, which we have done quite a bit over the last 2 days together. We need to come up with a common framework and methodology to identify when a faith-based partnership is most valuable and why. And I think that's been a big part of our conversation so far. The second is to build on a common foundation. In other words, how can we get better at and be more open to finding common ground in values and beliefs? And how can we use that to deliver better outcomes? This is a lot about shared principles and values, but then figuring out how do we actually act upon those and operationalize greater collaboration as a result of that shared trust that's built on shared value and relationship. The third is overcoming much of the complexity that we see in our landscape, which is probably getting more complex rather than less complex. So what can we do to resolve some of these structural challenges? We certainly heard some of that discussion reflected in the 2 cross-cutting sessions today, one on scale and one on overcoming many of the legal, political, cultural barriers and challenges that we face. And then the fourth has been an underlying theme, very much reinforced by the launch of the Lancet series on the contribution of faith-based actors in healthcare delivery and provision, on the importance of evidence. But we need to unpack that, and I think we've been trying to do that over the course of the last 2 days in terms of what kind of evidence is most compelling. How do we better marshal that evidence to the right people in key decision-making positions, policymakers, practitioners, and otherwise, so that they can then be convinced by that evidence and act on it? So this whole kind of theme of evidence has also been an underlying current. Before I kind of get into how we're going to kind of take these and now develop theme groups around them, I just want to mention that there are certainly limitations and constraints in any conference. We have done our best to pull together a very geographically representative, multi-religious group of people, which you all constitute, but we recognize that there are certain gaps. You've probably noticed that we've had a particular emphasis on Sub-Saharan Africa and even parts within Sub-Saharan Africa. We've touched on other parts of the world, but that is certainly something that we could strengthen, particularly how this agenda applies in Latin America and in Southeast Asia and other places. We also recognize that there are, gaps around the degree to which we can cover the multiplicity of development issues that faith organizations are engaged in. So we did choose just a number of cross-cutting areas and a number of thematic groups as a starting point, in part because we felt like there was a decent amount of evidence and amount of interest and collaboration in those areas. And we recognize that this is a part of a broader context where we're in this seminal moment where the world is discussing and debating what goals are going to replace the Millennium Development Goals. And that Sustainable Development Goal agenda, with its 17 goals and 169 indicators, is a critical one, and it's a massive one, and it very much should inform our discussions here. So with just a couple of those caveats, we want to jump into what we can do together that's going to have the most impact, that's going to enable us to move forward in the best possible way, recognizing that we all come from different vantage points, we're in different roles, but one of the real beauties of this conference is that it's created a space for us to have fairly candid and constructive conversations about how we work more effectively together. So as we move into these group discussions where we're trying to develop an action plan, we want to capture that diversity of voices, where we have leaders of faith-based organizations, religious institutions, alongside policymakers from development institutions, from the World Bank and USAID and BMZ and others, along with academics that have dedicated a lot of their own personal time and passion into researching many of these topics. So, if you can go to the next slide. This is kind of how we've tried to synthesize and consolidate the rich tapestry of conversation over the last 2.5 days or day and a half into a series of themes that we hope to discuss at your tables. And we're going to ask you to kind of vote with your feet by choosing one of these themes that you really want to dig into more deeply, that you think you can commit some action and some energy around as we try to move this forward. Now, many of you will probably be drawn to more than one theme, and certainly, even though you can't replicate yourself, cloning is not something we can do here. We do think that, if there's something you're interested in, you're going to hear a short report back from each group so that you can hear about some of the actual steps that they're recommending to move this forward. So the first theme is around framing the case. Again, it builds on the first key point that was raised in the McKinsey study. So it's really about how do we better bring new voices to the table so that we can have a broader constituency that's shaping this agenda. How do we distill lessons and gain deeper insights from many of our best practices? And we've heard many of them presented throughout this conference, but also how can we learn from failure and where we've tried and the results have been inadequate or incomplete. We want to try to develop a common framework and set of tools for how we can better link this agenda to the SDGs and harness the distinctive contributions of FBOs in improving development outcomes. So that's kind of the framing the case. Put very simply, how do we better harness and explain the value proposition and, in some cases, the comparative advantage of engaging more effectively with faith-inspired organizations? The second one is around building a common foundation. And some of this ties into some of the barriers that still exist within our institutions, whether they're attitudinal and perception-based, or whether they're also, in some cases, structural. How do we increase both faith literacy but also development literacy? And that's been a reoccurring theme that's come up quite a bit. So how do we build that common foundation that will enable us to work more effectively together? The third is around overcoming complexity. Complexity around scale, complexity around the modalities in which we work, complexity around capacity building and building on good practice. And again, we heard a number of good examples that we can build on and learn from today. And the fourth one is around strengthening evidence. Again, how do we marshal that evidence base more effectively? What are the gaps? Where can we work strategically and effectively together to close those gaps and to get the best evidence to the right people in the right way? And then there's a fifth that we've added, which is about how to create a clear process and spaces to take this agenda forward. That could include some kind of way to facilitate the development of greater action around some of the more specific recommendations you'll receive after this conference. It can include another convening, and we're not presuming that another conference just like this is exactly what's needed. But we want a group that's going to kind of wrestle with that, because as Matthew mentioned, we would hate for this to be a one-off exercise, that we come, we build some great relationships, we feel some real camaraderie, and then it quickly dissipates as we go back to the traffic of our daily lives, and we kind of get sucked back into the vortex of business as usual. So we really want to break out of that paradigm as much as possible. So that group can really wrestle with some of those questions about process for moving this forward, and also wrestle with some of the funding and resources that will be needed to support this work and better support the coordination that's necessary. So those are the 5 themes that the planning committee wants to present and lift up. I want to see if there's any questions or any kind of strong concerns or convictions that this doesn't capture enough what we discussed, or if there's something that needs to be clarified. We want to give you a little space to do that now. It's either crystal clear or as clear as mud. I'm not sure which. Becky and then Peter.
So is each table supposed to pick one of these 5 themes and try to distill some specific action items?
Yeah, so Matthew's going to get into that in a second, but just giving you a little preview of what he's going to say. We're going to have you choose a table that's assigned to one of these themes. So won't stay in your current groups. You're going to move to whatever one you're most drawn to and you think you can commit the most to. And then you're going to have another process, and we're actually going to give you a little bit more time to develop some concrete action steps. But we'll get into those details in a second. But in terms of the themes themselves, they feel like they're pretty much on the mark. Peter, do you want to add something?
Thanks. It seems to me that themes 1 and 4 are at least potentially quite close. And I wonder if you could say more to differentiate the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think 4 is certainly more focused on strengthening the evidence base in terms of measuring impact and being clearer about what type of evidence is most necessary and is going to be most compelling. I think 1 is a little bit more about framing. I mean, I can understand why there's overlap between them, but it's getting into how do we engage with development actors in particular, but certainly not exclusively those actors, in helping them to find better modalities of engaging with the faith-inspired organizations and building those partnerships. I think sometimes faith organizations tend to be an afterthought, or they can be considered important, but they have a hard time finding the entry points and the access points to be able to engage in the right policy-making discussion. So that might be another dimension. Certainly open to others to add to that. Yes, in the back.
Thank you. What I'm missing here, I think what the case for which we are here is the place of religion in development, and I think this is the case we are trying to highlight. But I'm not seeing it. I think for me it is the underlying issue. We are affirming that religion makes a special contribution to the agenda of the well-being of the world. And I think if this is the case we are making, if this is the claim we are making, I'm thinking that it should be bold. It should be bold in the case we are presenting.
Yeah, I think that fits perfectly into the first one. It's a good articulation of what that's trying to do. And really, the other ones reinforce that in a sense. They break it down into components. But ultimately, we are trying to make that stronger, clearer, more compelling case for what is the role of religion in advancing development, in advancing the SDGs, to link it to this new agenda that's being discussed and will be agreed to in September. And to do that, we think that better evidence is a critical component. We think that overcoming some of these complexities is a critical piece. And building a more common foundation for how we engage is also critical. So your point's well taken, but I hope that you kind of see that as an overarching goal, if you will, in each of these as subcomponents. So let me have Matthew come up and explain specifically how the group discussions are gonna be facilitated.
If I just add my spin on to that last 1 and 4 debate, I've always seen, I see the fourth one is the process of gathering evidence, the very technical process. How do we do that brilliantly? The first one is really, it's about communication. And it's really, how do we communicate? How do we engage stakeholders? How do we think? And often evidence is not the answer. It sometimes is, but it's very frequently not the answer to actually engaging hearts and minds. And so it's really thinking much more holistically about how do we shift perceptions. Right, so what we're going to do now is we've got 5 areas. So can I just ask you just for 20 seconds, look at the list and pick one. And when you've picked one, because we're getting a bit of movement here, I'd like you to put your hand up so I know that you've picked one, okay? I'm waiting for everyone to put their hand up, okay? You've got to pick one. Just mentally pick one. I'm still seeing some people with no hands up. I'm still seeing some people with no hands up. Okay? I'm still seeing some people with no hands up. That's fine. Okay, have we all got our hands up? I think. Can you see anybody who hasn't got their... Hands up. Very good. Okay, so remember the number. 1, so don't forget the number, please. Right, now, listen very carefully, okay? I'm going to ask you all to stand up now, please. Okay? Okay. Right, now, do you still remember your number? Okay, I would like everybody who wants to do number 1 to come and stand right down here in the corner. Okay, number 1, down here by me. Number 2, could you go and stand in that far corner, the front corner over there, to your right, to my left. Number 2 over there. Number 3 is in the far corner by the exit. Could you go there and stand in a huddle? Number 4, could you go and stand in the huddle over by the exit over there? And number 5, could you huddle in the middle, please? And could you please huddle? And don't stand in the middle. Kind of come together, get close to your friends and neighbors, and I'm going to wait until everybody is in a huddle. Okay? Get into a huddle. Vina, you're not in a huddle. Okay? And I'd just like the facilitators, could we make sure we've got... this is very nice. It's very nicely, fairly well split. So we'd just like facilitators to distribute themselves, ideally maybe 2 to each cluster. We're still not in huddles, please. The middle is not in a huddle. There's some people over there. Can you get into your huddles, please? I'm not going to give you your next instruction until you're in a huddle. Right. What I'd now like you to do is I'd like you to organize yourselves into groups of no more than 8, okay? So that might mean 2 groups. So there's probably 2 groups here, 2 groups over there, 2 or 3 groups in the middle, 2 or 3 groups in the back. And folks, just pause for a second. Folks, just silence for a second, please. Folks. Can you please make sure that in your groups you've got a mix of practitioners? So you've got donors, FBOs, try and just make sure you've got a mix, okay? Facilitators, off you go. And then could you sit at a table, and when you're sitting at your table, I'll give you your next instructions. Go. No, do mix people up. You want to mix them up. Yeah, sorry, Atala. Okay, as soon as you're in your group, can you please sit down at a table with at least one facilitator? I'm very impressed with the quality of self-organization going on here. Okay, could you sit at your tables, please? And I'm just waiting for everybody to sit down at a table. Could we sit down, please? Can the team in the far corner sit down, please? Can everybody sit down, please? I hope you don't mind me being a little bit directive. Okay, I'm just waiting for everybody to sit down out of respect to every individual. That was amazing. I'm very impressed. Right, well done. Right, and just the facilitators, I'm hoping there is at least one facilitator on each table. You do need your sheet. Are there 3 tables with no facilitators? Put your hands up to say you've got a facilitator, please. You haven't got a facilitator down here? We have. If you've got your facilitator, can you put a hand up? Excellent. And can you make sure you've all got your sheet, your fill-in sheet? Okay, have all facilitators got a sheet? Right. Oh, we've got spares, hopefully. Spares are coming. Right. Now, could I just I'm just going to give you your instructions. So you have 40 minutes now. You have 40 minutes for an exercise. And if we finish early, if people all feel they've done it, I'll check in and we'll finish early. But I'm deliberately giving you some time here, longer than you've had elsewhere. And what I'd like you to do is 3 things. The first thing is I want you to frame the issue. So if the first one is about framing, well, let's pick another one. Strengthening the evidence. Let's pick strengthening the evidence. I'd like you just to articulate what for you captures what we're really trying to do here. Put words around it. Put your own words around it in a group, okay? That's the first task, and there's a bit of the feedback form to do that in. The second thing I'd like you to do is talk, I need the sheet, I just need to make sure I remember, I think it's the next, thank you. So I want you to focus on what are the short-term, the top 3 things that we need to do to take this forward, this agenda forward at a corporate level. Okay? If you come up with 4 or 5, that's fine, but I really want to try and get you to focus on what do you think are the 3 things, the most important things. But let me emphasize, this is in the next 6 months. I'm not talking about over the next 10 years. This is short-term actions that will decisively take this agenda forward. What do you think collectively those are? And against each of those, I'd like you to think in each of those actions, who should take this forward in your view? And that could be a name, so you could name Matthew if you wanted to. It could be a group, so imagine if it's about evidence, you may well start pointing things the way of some of the academic institutions represented here, or the Joint Learning Initiative, and so on. So, or if it's in the first one, it might be about engaging some of the donors, and so on. So think who should be taking this forward, and try and when you think about who and think about these actions, can I ask you to think realistically? Please think realistically. Okay, and remember the people who are most likely to take forward this agenda are the people in this room and people we know. Okay, so let's try and be realistic in coming up with actions and who should lead it. That's your second task. And the third task is for you to imagine what might success look like in a year's time. How would you describe it? What do you hope, what do you dream will have been accomplished? How will you paint that picture around the specific framed issue that you've named? Okay, so those are the 3 things we're trying to do. If you've got questions, will you speak to your facilitator? But I hope that's clear enough. And if the facilitators are really stuck, they can come and ask me, and I'll stay here. Okay, so you've got 40 minutes beginning now. Okay, off you go. Thank you very much for your patience.